think they're gonna wrangle a few more people down here, so we'll give it just a second. And I apologize for the time it was taken to get things started here. For everybody on Zoom too, feel free to throw questions or comments in the chat. We'll try to address those as we go along. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Eric Smith. I am a senior managing cybersecurity consultant with Burns & McDonnell, actually 1898 company, which is a part of Burns & McDonnell. I have a 25-year IT background before I got into cybersecurity compliance, and I've been doing that for about 15 years now. In that time, in my consulting experience, I've consulted on a variety of infrastructure projects, most recently some offshore wind projects on the East Coast. Also some wind farms located in Montana, Texas, and California. Also solar farms located in California and Texas, and some large battery storage projects in Massachusetts, California, and Texas as well. So what I wanted to go over with you guys today is the idea, the concept of that nexus between risk, security, and compliance. And often in a lot of organizations, they're seen as three different areas within the organization. But for you guys as cybersecurity enthusiasts, I won't say students, I'll say enthusiasts, because you're excited about this journey you're on. It's really critical to keep in mind that these three go together, and working them all three together helps create the most secure possible environment that there is. So with that, give you guys a brief introduction into what I'm going to talk about here. So when we think about critical infrastructure, which is the utility industry encompassing electric, water, gas services, and some transportation services, critical infrastructure plays a pivotal role in today's society, functioning as technological advancements accelerate the ability to secure critical infrastructure faces an increasingly complex landscape of risks, security challenges, and regulatory compliance requirements. And they are all growing and becoming more complex on their own, which makes them even more complex as they come together. So I want to explore the nexus of that, right? Where they all are together in that in that space. That critical infrastructure relies heavily on that interconnected technology and advanced systems to deliver essential services, right? We can't have buses, trains, airplanes operating in today's environment without being connected technologically somehow, right? And so understanding the roles of operational technology and information technology and how that convergence of OT and IT has ushered in numerous benefits, but at the same time, right, some unprecedented challenges. And so real quick, does everybody understand the difference between OT and IT and what they are? Yeah? Everybody good on that? Okay. it's one of those concepts that has sort of grown up and not sure how much it's actually been perpetrated, been propagated out there, that the difference or the relationship between the two, right? So operational technology runs the systems that keep functions operating. IT manages the data and the flow of the information, right? So they're both necessary and they're both critical, and both of them can present a host of problems, right? So once upon a time, OT systems weren't really thought of as having to be secured in the same way that we have always thought of IT systems, because OT systems used to be operated manually, right? We would go in and throw a switch to operate a circuit breaker, or we would, if we wanted to change a switch on the railroad tracks for transportation, somebody would manually go throw a lever to do that. Hackers not going to be able to get in and do anything with that, right? They can't operate that remotely. But in the day and age of technological advancements and realizing how remote operations of these facilities can enhance profitability for those organizations, boy, it became really cool to be able to remotely operate those switches and those train tracks and everything else that's part of our critical infrastructure. And so now that complexity has led to a whole host of things that cause us to stay awake at night wondering how the heck we're going to get through all of this, right? Because now they're digitally remotely operated. That leaves the possibility for unauthorized actors to gain access to those operational facilities, as well as being able to exfiltrate their data as well. I know we talked earlier today about keeping your data safe and secure, what that can mean. Also, some of that data is not necessarily just personal data or financial data, but it can be the data that gives somebody access to those critical systems, those OT systems as well. So all of those are things that we have to keep in mind as we are, as we're thinking about these things as we go along. So I want to dive into the risks, some of the risks in the critical infrastructure as we think about it. And those risks are natural disasters, cyber threats, and geopolitical instability, right? And we think, well, natural disaster, how is that a threat? It's a huge threat to OT and IT, right? So when we think about climate change, right? Climate change is a real thing. It's happening every day. It's having a real impact on extreme hot weather, extreme cold weather. You guys all follow the news. You guys have seen all the cold weather events that have happened in Texas the last few years. Shuts down the electric grid, right? Shut down the natural gas supply, which had an impact on the electric grid. Climate change has a real impact on critical infrastructure. We're also seeing that just last week, right? Just last week in the Sierras here, Interstate 80 going over between California and Nevada, Donner Pass was shut down for 4 days because it was buried in snow. Again, an impact that climate change has had. And why do we care about that? Well, that's a main artery for our supply chain. So if you have an organization that is dependent upon a supply chain that delivers goods, services, or things by truck, climate change is impacting your supply chain now, right? So again, things we need to keep thinking about. Those are where risks are that we wouldn't necessarily think about it from a security perspective. But yeah, climate change has a big impact. Another one that all of you here local to Southern California are probably acutely aware of on a regular basis, if not a daily basis, are earthquakes, right? Earthquakes are a huge thing here to think of. We don't see them regularly. We can't know when exactly they're going to happen. But again, same thing. They will impact your supply chain. They will impact your ability to operate as well. It will impact your OT systems. So cyber threats. When we're talking about cyber threats, with that increasing digitization of all the IT and the OT systems, the cyber threats, data breaches, disruptions, and disinformation campaigns are all really a large part of the landscape. Think about this, nearly every device in your home is connected to the internet, right? Your TVs, your computers, Ring doorbells, nanny cams, for God's sakes, even your refrigerators now are connected to the internet, right? Everything is connected to the internet nowadays. And it's a few years ago with IoT, when it got to be a big thing, and these were first coming out, no one gave a single thought to security of those devices, right? And so it didn't take long for videos and images of babies in their crib showing up in exfiltrated data on the dark web somewhere. Same thing with doorbell captures or information about your viewing habits on your TV. All kinds of things can be captured, transmitted out of your home, and that data is captured somewhere else. So in the rush to adopt the technology, the securing of those devices got left behind. And so again, thinking about that, thinking about the security and the risks involved at the same time is really, really important. And lastly, geopolitical instability. And geopolitical instability comes in a lot of fashions. We think, first and foremost, we think about, okay, well, we hear about the nation state issues that are happening every single day. China, Russia are launching cyber attacks all over the place, but there are also non-nation state actors playing in there as well. Lots of groups that have claimed responsibility for disrupting things for political purposes, even though they're not nation states. And yeah, that's a big deal because some of those nation states actually have documented as part of their national defense posture that they will infiltrate the critical infrastructures of their enemies and lay dormant, so that if they do have some type of military interaction with them, the first thing they'll do is cripple the infrastructure, and their military defense is worthless at that point. So it's a stated posture in their military defense. We have to accept that, and we have to know that that is a target. And those are big. We understand those. We see that every day in the news. But let's think for a second about domestic political instability. We've seen a lot of political demonstrations lately on a variety of topics, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's the conflict in the Middle East. There's a variety of things that people are feel compelled to demonstrate about domestically. Those can easily escalate. We saw that during the pandemic with the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. Lots of examples of situations that spun out of control really quickly and became dangerous. Vandalism, sabotage, people getting hurt, all sorts of things can have an impact on critical infrastructure. Right? Those can bring things down as well. And then there are those domestic threats that look to impact critical infrastructure locally as well. So we have to think outside the box when it comes to all of those things, because they do have an impact on our security posture. So as we think about threats, as we think about risks, as we've accounted for them, we've analyzed them, we develop mitigation actions for them through security measures. That's how we address the risks. We either decide we're going to accept them or we're going to mitigate against them, right? However, there's a number of security challenges to those as well, right? Security efforts are not just cyber, but physical and social, right? So physical security challenges, it's not just having a locked door to keep unauthorized actors out of facilities, but also physical threats. Physical security includes securing that supply chain that we were just talking about, whether it be from natural disasters or whether it be from somebody actively trying to impact that, or some other thing that happens that can't be counted on in some form or another. Somebody screws up the schedule for shipping and your supplies aren't able to arrive, or someone disrupts the flow of natural gas. There was a few years ago, Xcel Energy in Colorado. Somebody decided that, hey, I don't like the way they do business, and they went up to a valve that was on an unmanned pipeline and just shut off the valve, turned it off, and about 4,000 homes in northwestern Colorado were impacted. Middle of winter, middle of ski season, and they were without gas. They couldn't heat the homes and so on and so forth. There was a supply chain disruption for all those people and any businesses that were counting on having natural gas to perform business in that area. It wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't a cybersecurity event, but it was physical security. So along those lines, another thing to keep in mind are the threats that come from insider threats. And it's another part of physical and the social pieces that often get overlooked. We take great task to ensure that the people working within the environments are vetted and are supposed to be working in those environments, but it's not unheard of for somebody to change their situation, for somebody to decide at some point, become a disgruntled employee, have conditions at home that might leave them subject to being taken advantage of, or just end up compromising their own credentials unwittingly, right? So insider threats are something that need to be taken into account as well. Cybersecurity challenges, which you guys have heard a lot about today already, right? We've been talking about those things all up and down, from the folks from LADWP and the city of Los Angeles talking about the different cybersecurity issues that they face, the red team, blue team conversations that are happening in the other room across the hall down there. Just a moment ago, Dylan talking about the MF leaking out and data exfiltrating out via electromagnetic waves out of your LCD monitors. Lots of things in the cybersecurity realm that are potential threats. And we've talked about and thought a lot about how do we prevent intrusion into the network, and how do we detect it, how do we prevent it, how do we detect it, intrusion in the network. But something that needs to be thought of as well is, as good as you can build a perimeter, something will get inside. So how do you prevent things from moving around once they get inside, right? So thinking about zero trust security inside your networks, prevent lateral movement inside those environments as well. Some other complications around that are social engineering. The social engineering complications bring a lot to it. I mentioned insider threats a moment ago. That's still the weakest link, right? And I've always had this this model of security being a three-legged stool, right? And a stool can't stand up if it's only got two legs. It needs at least three legs, right? And if any one of those legs goes, the stool falls over. You can secure physically your environment in such that it can't get into. You don't have any problems with your supply chain. Your locks are good, and nobody's going to get into your facilities, and everything is great as far as that's concerned. You can button down your cybersecurity so that nobody's going to get in that way. and that there's no way to move around once you get inside that network. But all it takes is one knucklehead to respond to a phishing email and exfiltrate their credentials, and now we've let people into the system. Was it Michael Tyner earlier from LADWT was talking about that he mentioned Ukraine incident in 2016, I guess it was. And that was exactly that. That's how that happened, right? That actually impacted 250,000 homes, locations, cut off electricity to them for 24 hours because someone had responded to a phishing email, sent out their credentials. The bad guys get in the network, spent 6 months in the network, roaming around, figuring out where everything was. And then eventually when the day came, it was brilliantly executed situation in that they did two things, three things actually. They got in, they understood what was happening. They were able to build themselves administrative credentials always in the network. The operations systems, as well as the finance systems, the communication systems, the whole bit. So they said, okay, great, let's shut off the electricity, right? That's one thing, but they went so far as to also mirror the operation control boards. So as far as the operators were concerned, everything showed green. Everything showed green, it was lit up, and everything was working just fine. And the third thing they did was they whacked the communications. They busied out all the phone lines coming into the communication center. So they were sitting there in the utility that day thinking everything was just great. All the lights were green on the control panel. Nobody was calling into the customer service center, and everything was all honky dory. And finally, it took about 4 hours before someone was able to get through to them and say, "Hey, everything's shut down." And then they had to go back. Then it took hours to undo things to be able to get the electricity turned back on again. But again, where did that stem from? Just took one knucklehead answering a phishing email, and that was that. So that's that third leg of the stool, right? That's still, no matter how good our physical security is, no matter how good our cybersecurity is, that social piece is still a big piece. Education, communication is a huge piece of what needs to happen. All right. So all right. So we've talked about complications, challenges in the risk area. We've talked about challenges in the security area. How does compliance fit into all this? Well, one of the biggest challenges with security is that organizations often have to balance risks, the cost of risk mitigation actions against the financial profits of the organization, right? Whether or not it's paying shareholders, whether it's constrained governmental budgets, whatever it might be, there's a lot of stuff that's going to pit those security best practices against how much money there is to spend, right? So that then brings up, well, how do we get around that? So the prevalent thought of the day is, okay, let's turn to compliance frameworks, right? Some sort of regulatory process that says, if you follow one of these frameworks according to your industry, your vertical, you will then at least be secure enough to see, not fully protected, let's say that, but you will at least secure the systems. So critical infrastructure then operates within a number of these frameworks, right? And the ones I have up on the screen are a variety of them, and most of them I list the NIST cybersecurity framework at the top purposely because most of them fall out from that NIST cybersecurity framework. Certifications like ISO certifications is a great way to demonstrate that there are security concerns taken into effect, and that there are things being done to demonstrate that security measures are in place. And then the different the different critical infrastructure industries, TSA pipeline for oil and gas pipeline systems, that really came into the public forefront after the Colonial Pipeline compromise a few years ago. NERC-CIP has been around since 2007, after a huge blackout in the New England area. And then AWIA is another area that is just now coming into prominence because of the understanding of the impact of the water systems and the wastewater systems within the critical infrastructure environment. So these frameworks establish some guidelines and some standards for those organizations, be they investor-owned utilities or government, municipally owned utilities or so on, to follow. Have some standards that they have to follow, that's sort of a baseline they have to meet in order to in order to stay secure. Some of them, like NERC-CIP, go a little further than just saying you need to do this. They actually have fines and penalties associated with their standards, with regular audit schedules for those entities. So much so that within the NERC-CIP arena, failure to comply with those NERC-CIP standards could result in fines of $1 million per day per violation. And some have been assessed at that level. Duke Energy a few years ago had a fine that totaled about $10 million they had to pay. PG&E, close to 10 years ago, had a $3 million fine as a result of a cybersecurity violation that they had to pay. So these are real. They are real. They're not messing around, and it adds to that level of complexity for organizations in terms of understanding what they need to do to be secure, right? You need to have constant pulling from different directions. What do we need to do from a risk perspective? What do we have to do from a security perspective? And then who's yelling at us from a compliance perspective on what we need to do, right? So how do we deal with that, right? So thinking about resilience, and resilience is really the way we want to think about this. It's not security, right? Because we know, right? We know you guys have been in enough classes on cybersecurity at this point that there's no such thing as a fully locked down and secure environment. Period. Just isn't. And we've already talked about that. As soon as you think it's locked down, well, here comes that earthquake. And you're not secure anymore. Or the next 0-day vulnerability strikes, and there you go. Or Betsy Accounting has responded to that spear phishing attack, and now someone's got access to your environment, right? So we're not talking about security so much as we're talking about resilience, right? We're talking about elasticity, right? We're gonna make things as secure as possible. And for those things that we can't secure, or for those risks that we can't mitigate, we are going to have a mitigation action. We're going to have a posture that's going to say, great, if this gets exploited, we're going to have an incident response approach, right? And we're going to be able to bounce back from it quickly and back in operation again. So when we think about an integrated approach, we're going to line up these 5 different pieces, right? We've talked about risk assessments. We've talked about security measures. We talked about adherence to compliance. We're gonna now add in some incident response, right? So when that situation happens, we're gonna have a really solid, tested, planned out, ready to go incident response plan that has people wearing the yellow helmets with the red light on top and the bright orange vests that are running around with somebody hacks the network, starts screaming, unplug your computer, unplug your computer. So a good incident response plan that's really effective. And then the 5th piece, which is really the most important, is active open lines of communication. And it's not just from the security guys saying, hey, you gotta do this, hey, you gotta do this, but it is executive level, C-level, people at the top saying, yes, this is important, making sure that everyone is participating. It's feedback from users saying, hey, I'm seeing this is happening. It's also communication with vendors. We're developing our security program, we're taking risk mitigation approaches, and we're looking at our supply chain. What are you gonna do if there is something that prohibits you from getting what we need from you? Or if they are a supplier of, say, software. SolarWinds was mentioned earlier today, right? And that communication with SolarWinds needs to be, what are you doing now to ensure that those patches that are coming from you are not actually intercepted and infected by somebody from the outside, right? What happens if you find out that there's a compromise on your system? What are you going to do to make me whole? Or how are you going to let me know, right? So that communication has to be happening back and forth in every single one of those directions. And that's what we mean by the integrated approach, right? So let's take a look at each one of these 5 things in a little deeper. So first, let's talk about risk. Risk assessments are a really critical piece of this, and they're a really critical first step, right? Because we can say, oh, well, we need to have firewall. We need to have virus software. And we need to make sure that we train everybody on how to avoid phishing attacks. Yes. But if we don't know, if we haven't done a true risk evaluation and an assessment of our environments and all the things that come into play, we don't know if our system is secure at this point, right? So a good risk assessment, a good comprehensive risk assessment is going to identify and prioritize those potential threats, vulnerabilities, and those consequences, right? What's going to happen if one of those risks is exploited? And it's got to include both physical and cyber risks, and then also consider that the interconnected nature of all the operations, right? So taking a look at the different pieces, right? Conducting a risk assessment has got to first start with identification. And again, looking at all those pieces, right? We talked about the physical security pieces. We talked about the cyber pieces. We talked about the social pieces. When we look at the physical, let's look at the supply chain as well. We're talking about the social. Let's make sure we're looking at the potential for insider threats. We need to be looking at all of these things as we're going about them. When we've collected that list of all those potential risks, right, we're going to list them out there, and then we're going to do an analysis. We're going to evaluate each and every one of those risks for the likelihood and impact of that exploitation, right? And also prioritize them based on the potential consequences. We're going to give them a score, right? Because we want to know which are the most critical, which are the highest priority. And that score might be comprised of a couple different things, right? It might be comprised of what might have the greatest impact on our environment, but we might also want to know what's the highest cost, right? There's an old adage that has the cost of mitigating risk versus the level of risk is an asymptotic equation. You'll never get to fully secure, right? You can spend as much money as is available in the whole world, and you'll never be fully secure. And so the same thing is there. If we need to determine what the cost is to mitigate this risk, might be part of our equation as well. So we're going to analyze those and determine which ones need to be addressed. And lastly, we're going to develop a mitigation plan. Right? So that mitigation plan is going to contain strategies to either develop security postures, whether it be policies, procedures, systems, environments, architecture, whatever it might be, physical security components as well, all of those things to mitigate those risks. Or it may just be, this is an item of risk that we've determined we're not going to spend that much money on. We're going to accept that level of risk, but we are going to identify that it is a potential risk, and this is what we're going to do if that gets exploited, right? So that's going to be part of our mitigation plan also, because we know we can't mitigate everything, but we can have a plan to deal with it should it get exploited. Next, we're gonna take a look at our security measures. So we've done our risk assessment, we've got our mitigation plan. We're gonna develop our security measures to address those and take a look at at how we're gonna fix the risks that we can, what plans we're gonna implement to address the risks that we're not going to address, and go from there, right? So we want to implement a layered security architecture. As Michael Tyner again was talking about the Swiss cheese, the defense in depth approach. It doesn't just apply to cybersecurity, right? Let's think about all of our security in the defense in depth approach, right? So we want to make sure that we have layers of security over many things. So we're gonna look at intrusion detection. We're gonna look at another layer of that is going to be logging, user access to the systems, and we're gonna start with cybersecurity awareness. Again, we're gonna become poor Betsy in accounting again. She's got that phishing email. She's been trained on phishing emails now, right? But we're also logging all of those access attempts. And we're looking at, okay, well, we see Betsy logging into the system at 3 a.m. She's not the kind of person that wakes up at 3 a.m. and logs in remotely, right? She doesn't have remote access to the system. That should raise a red flag, right? So we're doing access monitoring, and we've got intrusion detection and prevention as well, right? So again, defense in depth. We've got multiple ways to address these things, right? So we want to make sure that we're looking at a layered defense in depth security architecture that combines those physical security measures with advanced cybersecurity technologies, right? We want to make sure that this is all dovetailed together, right? We want to take a look at from a cybersecurity perspective, we want to implement those robust cybersecurity measures that we were just talking about, right? Including malware, ransomware, unauthorized access, and again, as I mentioned earlier, not just focusing on that intrusion detection and prevention, but also developing an architecture, a zero trust architecture that doesn't allow things to just move freely inside your network and bounce around like a ping pong ball and everything's affected then and the whole thing goes to heck. We also want to, in our integrated approach, as we're developing our security measures, think about physical security, right? So our physical security for our assets and facilities, we want to make sure we have not just a lock on the door, because anybody can steal a set of brass keys, go down to Ace Hardware, get a copy made, come in, unlock the door, walk in undetected, unannounced, and leave completely undetected. So let's think about that, right? So maybe we need to have some electronic access measures. Maybe we need, badge card readers. Maybe we need to have, for more secure areas, combine that card reader with some type of biometric, some type of multi-factor authentication as well, right? So let's get a little more jiggy with that physical security as well. And let's make sure that everything is protected. One of the things that gets overlooked a lot are small windows, also false floors and drop ceilings, okay? Any of those arenas where you might have a data center that's got a drop ceiling in it, well, if your sidewalls don't go all the way up to the top above that drop ceiling, it's very easy for somebody to climb over that, pop out your drop ceiling, drop in, and now they've got physical access to all the wonderful goodies that hide inside that data center now. So thinking about physical security beyond just locking the door, right? We want to make sure that there's no other possible way that somebody can get into those facilities, right? And the same thing as we were talking about with our cybersecurity, well, let's make sure that we have a zero trust environment from a physical security perspective as well, right? So that means I got to badge out also, okay? So now, if somebody was able to badge in and say perhaps they tailgate behind someone into a secure facility, they're gonna have to badge back out again, right? So now we make sure they can't get in and start moving around between things. Let's not just lock the perimeter of the building. let's make sure we have security for those specific rooms that have even more high security components inside of them, right? So physical security needs to take into account all of that. And I keep coming back to supply chain in physical security as well, where you have things like electricity, water, internet, natural gas, those feeds into your environment that are critical to the operations of your facility. We want to make sure that those continue to operate. You have those feeds continuous on a regular basis. If you have a data center that is that has an environmental controls using liquid cooling, and your whatever the cooling agent is in there, whether it be nitrogen or whether it be chilled water from the outside or whatever it might be, and that gets disrupted, and now all of a sudden the temperature in the data center starts creeping up above 85 degrees, 95 degrees. Guess what? Your systems are toast, and nobody has set foot inside there, but your supply chain got compromised, right? So again, supply chain is critically important. Supply chain is just not those 18-wheelers delivering, the snacks and coffee, but it's also those things that bring in the critical things to run your systems from the outside as well. And last but not least here, again, it's that third leg of the stool, is that social engineering piece, right? We've got to have good training programs. We've got to have good security awareness campaigns that are not just ho-hum, yeah, you're droning on and on again. We turn down the volume like we do the commercials on TV. Nobody even sees commercials on TV. Everybody streams shows now, right? Does anybody even know what a commercial on TV is? Sorry, that's my boomer side coming out. But let's make them interesting. Let's make them fun and interesting, right? So that we challenge people. Let's make it a game, right? Let's do phishing campaigns as a game and have a contest. I have a great story about that. My son's fiance just started working for a firm you guys might know of it. In fact, Equinix, they do co-location and hosting. They're a big IT outsource center. And she's working in their legal department, and she just started there about a month and a half ago. And the first of the month after she started, they kicked off a phishing campaign. And she hardly knew anybody in the company. And so she actually won the phishing contest because every single email she got, she didn't know anybody, so nobody was sending her emails. So everyone she got, she sent right back saying it's phishing, it's phishing. And they were like, oh my God, she's amazing. And so in her first month there, she won the phishing contest. But, the point is, it was a contest. It caught her attention. So she was like, okay, well, I'm going to pay attention to this now. And so if we do that, if we make it interesting and exciting, it makes people think about it. And if they get engaged in that contest and they're thinking about it, and they actually do get that text at 8 o'clock at night that says your boss needs you to go buy 75 Target gift cards, they're going to be like, oh, I remember this. This is part of that phishing contest. I'm going to win this month too, right? So now you got people actually thinking. Right? They're engaged now instead of tuning it out and saying blah, blah, blah. So we've done our risk assessment. We developed our mitigation plan. We're giving some real deep thought to our security posture and what we're doing from our security pieces. But we have this other piece out there, our compliance piece. We know it's out there, but what are we going to do about it, right? Regulatory compliance, you need to understand and adhere to those industry-specific standards if they apply to your organization, right? If you have compliance obligations that apply to your organization, you need to take that into account as part of your risk assessment. Understanding those before you get into it developing your security measures to exceed your compliance requirements is critical. It's absolutely critical. Don't just step over the low bar, right? If you're just stepping over the low bar, your system is not secure. Compliance does not equal secure. Plain and simple. That's it's a misnomer that organizations have all the time. Well, look, met level of compliance, I'm not gonna get fined, I'm all good, our system's secure. Well, I guarantee you, they're the first one that's gonna get whacked by a compromise, right? So how are we gonna do that, right? So one of the quickest, easiest ways to do it is make sure that you have internal policies and procedures that really enforce good security hygiene, right? Make sure that those physical security measures are being addressed. Make sure that nobody's tailgating, right? Make sure that everybody else knows that when they go into a door and somebody's walking behind them, they turn around and stop and say, yo, dude, what's up, right? No tailgating. Making sure that when they see something, they're talking about it, they're letting somebody know, right? Have policies and procedures that the users are actually engaged in. And when I'm talking about users, I'm not just talking about Betty in accounting, but all of your IT and OT users have to be part of this as well. All of your admins have to be part of it as well, because I guarantee you, some of those guys are the sloppiest in the world, right? Your IT and OT admins can be extremely sloppy. They have their laptop locked in their office, and so they rarely let their laptop go to sleep, and they'll get up, run over to the kitchen, go grab a cup of coffee, and just leave it open because they think, I'm just gonna get it and be right back. Man, that's totally right for somebody getting hacked at that point. We used to have a joke that we would play on those sysadmins. Everybody knows who David Hasselhoff is, right? Am I really showing my age now? We used to, in my IT days, when a sysadmin went off and left their computer open like that, we would instantly go grab a picture off the internet of David Hasselhoff, usually laying down with, in some sort of loungy pose, and put it on their laptop, on their screen, on their backdrop, on their screen. And when they came back, there was David Hasselhoff, and they knew, oh, I got hoffed. So, again, it was a quick and easy way to demonstrate to them that, hey, don't do that. You've left yourself vulnerable, right? So, make sure that even those people that are supposed to be the keepers of the secrets, the keepers of the security, know and understand that they have to abide by these same policies and procedures as well. So we talked about resilience, right? Rather than security. When we adopt an approach of resilience, we're understanding that we're going to do the best we can to secure and protect our environment, but we know we're not infallible. So we develop an incident response plan that's going to help us address whatever might occur should something happen, right? So that robust incident response plan has got to minimize the impact of those security breaches and other disruptions when they happen, right? So we need to understand that something may happen. And when we do, what are we going to do to make sure that we address it right away? Part of it is that yellow helmet with the red light on top and the bright orange vest and running around yelling and screaming that there's been a security breach. But it's also to say, okay, how are we going to do this? Who is our incident response team? Who's in charge of it? Who's going to take care of the technical piece? Who's going to communicate with the executives? How are we going to address this? How are we going to segment the network? How are we going to air gap everything so that we can stop it from spreading, right? That incident response plan has got to take all of that into account. In addition, it can't just be that incident response plan that we develop, right? We write it all down, we put it on the shelf, and it sits there, and it just collects dust. And it's there for 4 or 5 years, and then all of a sudden, we have a breach, and somebody goes, "Oh, what are we supposed to do? We have an incident response plan around here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Grab it off the shelf. Blow the dust off of it. What does it say we're supposed to do now?" And start reading at that point. It's too late. At that point, you're already toast, right? So take that plan out, drill on it, go through it, walk through it on a regular basis. Create a fire drill, right? Go in one day and have everybody in a room and have everybody logged into your dev environment. Please don't do this on a production environment. Go into your dev environment and unplug a server, right? And say, okay, figure it out. Now what are you gonna do? And implement your incident response plan at that point and walk through it and take the opportunity then to say, oh, what worked, what didn't work. So take that holistic approach, have everything accounted for in it, do continuous monitoring of all of those mechanisms within your environment, but also continuous monitoring of your plan to make sure that it is up to date. And it is, and everyone that has a role in that plan understands what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. And part of that is to communicate with your users. See something, say something. See something, say something. Don't ever let something go by and say, oh, well, must just be the IT guy in my computer doing a patch update or something. That must be why the mouse is moving around on the screen by itself. No, it should never assume anything. And then we're going to take an adaptive security posture, right? That means we're going to be flexible. It needs to not just be that set it and forget it, right? We need to constantly be coming back to it and saying, oh, things have changed. We've got new systems in the environment now. We've got a new supplier for drinking water. We've hired new sysadmins. There's a whole bunch of things. Things are constantly changing. Things are constantly evolving. So anytime there's a change, pull out the plan, run through the plan again. This is the new changes to our environment, the new people on our staff, the new systems, the new upgrade to the software, or does the plan still work and adapt with that as well? So lastly, in our integrated approach, communication. None of this works without communication. We can go through and do a risk assessment by ourselves in a closet and come up with all this stuff and have what we think is a perfect risk analysis and a perfect mitigation plan. And then we can go and develop security measures all by ourselves and implement some of those and make sure that they've adhered to our compliance obligations all by ourselves in our closet still. And we can draft up that incident response plan and keep it right there in our lab with us. And guess what? The whole thing's gonna fall flat. If we don't communicate this with everyone else in the organization, if we don't get buy-in from the executives to say, hey, everybody, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if your budget is already maxed out. You need to make sure that you take these steps to maintain physical and cybersecurity, right? You've got to have that communication with those folks outside of your organization in your supply chain. You've got to make sure that everybody involved in your incident response plan knows what their roles are. All of those communications have to happen. Your stakeholder communications, your user communications, and your external communications, right? Absolutely critical. If we don't communicate all this stuff, it's not going to work. And we're just not communicating that out, but we need to be open to receiving feedback. When somebody tells us, hey, this doesn't work, or I noticed this, we need to be open in receiving that information also, right? So all that has to be a part of what is part of our communication plan. So lastly, in conclusion, critical infrastructure faces that intricate web of risks, security challenges, and compliance demands, right? They all fit together, and they all have to be considered together in order to be effective, right? Navigating that nexus requires a strategic and integrated approach. You can't do one in a silo without the rest of them and expect there to be a secure and resilient environment, right? So requires that strategic integrated approach that recognizes those interdependencies between all five of those components. And by prioritizing those risk assessments, one thing I meant to mention with the risk assessments, we don't do a risk assessment just once, right? You got to do them again and again and again and again and again. Just like the incident response plan, when something changes in your environment, that's going to change your risk posture, right? So we got to go back and take another look at that. We're going to reevaluate our risks at that point and ensure that we have not missed anything along the way, and that nothing has changed to a point that it's not recognizable anymore. So keeping all that in mind, taking that integrated approach, you will have a resilient environment, and in the most secure it can possibly be in the world that we live in now. So that's what I've got for you. Thank you, everybody. Anybody have questions? Yeah, absolutely.
Did you ever lock someone's computer and change the keyboard to the Dvorak and print it out?
That'll keep them from leaving it open, huh? My kids have done that to me on Netflix, where they went in, everybody has their own profile on Netflix, and they went in and changed mine to a foreign language, Turkish, I think it was, or something, and I'm like, I can't even figure out what I'm watching now. Anybody else, any other questions, comments, thoughts, concerns? Yes?
I've actually read a little bit about zero trust, and I want to ask about cybersecurity as a culture. Do you think that unifying exercises as you introduce them that development, or
I think it's an effective way. Again, every environment is going to have a way it's going to be most effective for the culture within that organization, right? So whatever it's going to take for that organization to start to develop that culture of security is really what you need to do. And if you have a user base that understands the response to gamifying situations like that, right on, man, definitely, adopt that. Anything that's going to keep your user base, your executive base, and all of your sysadmins involved and engaged in it, by all means. Some places say, look, everybody gets a Tootsie Roll for, whatever it takes, and, keep people engaged, keep people wanting to know more, and that's going to definitely keep a user base. It keeps that third leg of the stool up for you, absolutely. Anybody else, any other questions? All right, well, thank you guys all very much.